Um, Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for the fourth PUCAR Learning Circle. Today, we have with us Swagata, Deepika from Enfold, Nimisha, Arti, Urvashi from Counsel to Secure Justice, and Sachi from Ashiyana Foundation, all of whom are leaders in the restorative justice space in India. The idea behind today's learning circle is really to learn more about restorative justice from all of them. And I'm really curious to see, perhaps, we'll start seeing connections between our own work and restorative justice. I'll leave it to them to share more, and we'll follow up with a Q&A and discussion after that. Over to you.
Thank you, Ayushi. I think we'll start with D. So D, over to you.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. All right, hopefully you can see it. Just a disclaimer, I am a little unwell today, so if I would love it if you can all just be a little patient in case I am a little inarticulate, but yeah, really excited to have this discussion, explore together. I'm going to start us off today, and I'm keeping my camera off so I can also just kind of focus on this conversation. So for the next, I think I have 15-ish minutes. We will build our understanding of restorative justice. We won't get through a lot. So we're going to just scratch the surface and hopefully, dive deeper during the discussion. So there's that. I think in the interest of time, I would love it if all can just share how you're coming into this session today. What are you feeling in one word?
Eager.
Thank you. Okay, lots of curiosity. Curious and tired, that's where I'm at as well. Thank you, thank you. All right, keep it coming in. And while you're sensing how you're feeling, I just want to share this with you. The wisdom is in the room. So what does this really mean? I put this in there to just acknowledge and recognize that everyone in this room, each one of us who has shown up today, brings a wealth of knowledge and life experiences and our own intuitions. Sorry, 1 second, folks. Yes, so we've all encountered difficult situations, conflicts, and harm in our lives, and we all already possess the wisdom to respond to these situations. And you might find after today's conversation that you have been practicing some of the skills that are needed to hold restorative justice processes. Skills that, situations where you've been, where you've actually handled a situation that has, ensured everyone's healing, has ensured everyone has built some understanding about each other. So as we explore what restorative justice is together, let's remember that this approach is not foreign or, like I was saying, an alien concept that is applied elsewhere. We're all intuitively doing this work. It's just that some of us have practiced the skills, have thought about harm and violence in our communities, studied it, and then become practitioners of it. So that is also not to say that we're experts who hold all the knowledge and know everything, because knowledge cannot be owned. And hopefully you might also discover how this applies to you personally and how restorative justice principles align with your own values and experiences. So I also want to share that what I will share and what I will talk about today comes from a very Western framing of RJ, which often involves this erasure of many cultures and traditions in which this practice is rooted. So I just want to take you through this quote and I will read it for us. Many indigenous communities don't use the term restorative justice, but they've been doing their variation of it for centuries before the West created a word for it. In the indigenous paradigms of peacemaking, of which there are many, justice is embedded in a holistic worldview. In a holistic worldview, we don't separate things. Meaning peacemaking and circle are embedded in a way of life, and the outcome of justice is deeply tied to healing and restoring balance to oneself, one's relationships, and nature. Therefore, the notion that there is some practice or tool called restorative justice that stands apart from a way of being and living together is not accurate and not a commonly used term. So just to acknowledge this, this term, restorative justice starts, getting the attention, the fame. It's become quite a buzzword. There's money. It also has been co-opted, which means it's being used in ways that sometimes are very detached from this understanding of restorative justice. So acknowledging that, firstly, it has been practiced in indigenous cultures as a way of life, and that in its modern sense, it has become very detached from it as well. So maybe building some curiosity there would be really good as we start to explore this together. So I want to invite everyone to think of the first memory that you have of being punished for doing something wrong. And I'd invite you to think of a memory that doesn't bring up very difficult feelings for you. So on a scale of 1 to 10, it could be somewhere around 1 or 2 in terms of the intensity of the experience. So something that happened that you felt some closure around now, and you can, become curious about it and think about it. So anyone who is feeling invited to share, give us maybe 15 seconds to think about. And I would love for you to, maybe one person to unmute and share their experience, and for the rest of us to put it in the chat. Your first memory of being punished for doing something wrong. Yes, talking to the person sitting next to me in class, for answering a question wrong in Sanskrit class at school when I was about 6 years old. Even my first memory involves a classroom. It's very interesting. Anyone feeling like they want to unmute and share?
I can go, D.
Go for it.
Yeah, so I think this is a memory from probably grade 2, which has stayed with me. I've not been able to forget that. I remember being like another teacher standing at the door of my classroom and screaming at me because we had a change of class teacher. So, she was our class teacher earlier, and then we had a new class teacher. And when the new class teacher came in, all of the students were like, "We're so happy you're our class teacher," all of that. And then I ended up telling her that, they're saying all this to you, but they told the old class teacher that they were really missing her and how they don't like you. So it was a very stupid thing on my part to have done, because I kind of outed my friends who who kind of buttered up both the teachers. Now this teacher felt bad and told the other teacher in the in the staff room that the children said this, and I felt really bad. And she probably told her that, oh, Swagata is the one who told me. And then this old teacher stands at the door of the class, and she just screams, and she's like, you're uncivilized. I'm sure you're the only child, and I'm not the only child. And she's like, you're utterly spoiled, like, you have no manners, you have no sense. And standing and it's like a classroom of, I think, 60 or, 60, 65 students. So that memory has never left me. Like, I felt so ashamed, guilty, belittled, afraid, all of that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Swagata. That sounds like, even all of my memories from the classroom, this reminds me so much of like how that punishment is, how it feels, the experience of it. And I was curious to ask you a follow-up and for you to think about like, what was it that you needed at the time? What is that something that you have thought about in terms of your needs?
Yeah, I think like I came from a space where, I mean, I viewed this as being frank and honest. Like that was the space from which I went in, because I felt like, in my head, in my little 8-year-old head, I felt like these classmates of mine were being, disingenuous by praising the other teacher and then saying this.
Mhm.
So in my head, I was like, oh my God, I've been honest, and, this is what it has backfired into. But in that moment, I think it would have been nice for someone to comfort me, like, or to even be called separately and said that, well, this is not how you do things. And, I felt bad about what you said. I would have appreciated not such a public, uh, you know, uh, public announcement of how my behavior was problematic. Like I would have appreciated someone calling me out separately and saying it was not right the way you did it. Or someone to even reach out to me after it had happened, to say some words of comfort.
Yeah, yeah, that makes so much sense. Thanks for sharing. Thank you, everyone who's been sharing in the chat. Lots of classroom experiences, and I think we can really think about what we learned about punishment in our childhood and even what it taught us about justice, and what were actually things that we needed at that time. So if you were having a hard time remembering one memory, I just want to tell you that you're not alone, because punishment is so ingrained in our culture and lives that it almost feels completely naturalized. It's the norm. But we know it when we experience it. Like even how Swagata was describing her experience, you know viscerally what punishment feels like. Um, so what we will try to explore today is the idea that punishment actually undermines safety. So we're defining here punishment as inflicting suffering on others, on someone in response to an experience, whether of wrongdoing or harm or violence. Um, so I'm just going to invite you to just continue thinking about it. We won't be able to get into this too deeply, but to really think about these questions, these prompts, and think about like what are the messages that you have learned about punishment and justice while in your childhood, even in your life generally. And which brings me to really thinking about what the purpose of restorative justice is. So usually, I've often noticed that people uh, get familiarized with RJ as being an alternative to punishment, as though punishment is default, which is the philosophy of our criminal justice system, which it seems to follow by equating taking accountability for the wrong you have done with getting some kind of punishment. So that's what it thinks of. That's how it thinks of accountability. But what restorative justice actually does is it has its best purpose in building community, in building relationships. So if I ask everyone here, what does safety mean to you? I'm kind of confident that you won't say police cars in my neighborhood or men in uniform on my streets or prisons and courts are what make me feel safe. And trust me, I've asked this question a lot, and I'm yet to. I think it was actually a police woman who said that police would make her feel safe, and I didn't get to really explore more with her. But usually, it's things like community, my family, friendships, people who make me feel heard and seen, my home, the smell of my food. So restorative justice has its best purpose in building that beloved community where everyone has what they need, their basic needs are met, their human dignity is intact, it's acknowledged, and we're also always working at preventing things from going wrong. So knowing fully well that things will go wrong. But if something does happen, then you are thinking about addressing it and restoring community. So what is needed to build community? And if there are any ruptures, then what is needed to restore it back to harmony? This is really the purpose of restorative justice. And how do you really build this community? What kind of relationships do we want to build? Because restorative justice really, relationships are central to its philosophy. So what does this ecosystem of relationships in such a beloved community look like? So we're saying that it starts with the self. Have I examined my needs, my thoughts, my biases, how I show up in relationships? What is my conflict style? What do I usually do when there is a conflict, when things go wrong? What do I have to unlearn? What do I have to learn? And then, moving towards interpersonally, how are the relationships between people? What kind of messages do our institutions uphold? What kind of society are we building? So really thinking about our relationship with all of these and how to address the issues that plague us. So what comes in the way of these relationships is, of course, conflict, which is natural, it is inevitable, and sometimes it's even an opportunity. I would say most of the time, all of the time, conflict is an opportunity for growth, for transformation, to learn something new, but it's also really, really scary. And the knowledge that it is inevitable also brings up a lot of feelings in us. And a lot of us do grow up conflict avoidant and don't want anything to do with conflict, and do adapt a lot of strategies to deal with conflict that look different for all of us. There's also our traumas. We will always scratch up each other's wounds. We will harm each other intentionally or unintentionally. So there is going to be that kind of suffering involved in our interpersonal dynamics. And of course, there will always be systemic and structural challenges. So, what we're up against are these huge barriers that are bigger than us to be able to challenge and dismantle alone. And so we challenge them together through relationships, is what restorative justice philosophy is, through strong, accountable communities that is always preventing and restoring harmony by recognizing what is needed. So I'm going to move to introducing this continuum to you. This is just to give you a full sense of the full spectrum of restorative practices. This is by Bilfina Yawon, and I found it really helpful. I use it because I find it very helpful, and we may not all agree with this, but this is one of the continuums that I really appreciate, because she explains that a lot of the times when people get familiarized with this work, with the term restorative justice, they come through the responsive end of it. So they're like, if there's a dispute, there is a conflict, there is a harm that has happened, then that's when restorative justice enters. But what we rarely actually do talk about is that there is a huge proactive end that is either unfamiliar or we forget about. So when we look at the proactive end of restorative practices, we have, and she gives the examples of what are called affective statements, and there are community building circles. So essentially, affective statements teach us how can we communicate restoratively? How can we have restorative conversations? How can we become curious about each other's traumas, each other's experiences, and how do we do it in a very informed way? How do we communicate to each other in ways that are sensitive, using that information? And so thinking of, restorative practices really thinks of this practice as a way of being. So it's not just something that you do for work, but it's actually it includes everything from how we communicate with one another. So that has to be something that's rooted in restorative practices, which means that our response, however we respond to harm or even smaller conflict, should prevent us from moving towards harm. So we don't want to cause more harm in the process. We want to restore the community. We want to restore harmony. So it's really intentionally thinking about what does a response rooted in these practices look like. And affective statements, she explains, are this proactive tool. So you're using I statements instead of saying you did this and you blame me for, it's because of you that I feel this way. You're using I statements and you're actually expressing your personal feelings in response to someone's behavior. And you're not just blaming them for what they did. You're saying, when this happened, this is how I felt, instead of the you language. So I mean, there are a whole spectrum of practices that we can call restorative practices, and these statements are one of them. And there's also community building circles. So if someone, for instance, oversteps our boundaries, say something offensive, how do you actually communicate that? And affective statements could help with that. And community building circles are essentially our ways of consistently engaging with each other in this very structured way where you're able to communicate our needs. And there are different elements to what a restorative circle looks like, and you're taking the time and effort and intention to sit with each other, and you're making yourself more and more prepared to act restoratively, instead of being in complete chaos when there is a challenge in community and you have absolutely no idea how to engage with each other. So the reason we're talking about restorative practices is because it's important to see restorative justice in context to this larger practice of responding without causing harm, because restorative practices also really recognizes that oppression is at the root of all forms of violence and harm. And we need to proactively do the things that we need to do to address those oppressions at all levels. And, these practices are really integral to building those kinds of accountable communities where we all have the skills to respond to harm. So in the responsive end is, of course, restorative justice and transformative justice. We're not getting into transformative justice today or community accountability. But this is really for you to just, get a sense of where this practice belongs in this continuum. Here's a definition for what a restorative justice process looks like. Restorative justice refers to any process which enables those harmed by crime and those responsible for that harm, if they freely consent to participate actively in the resolution of matters arising from the offense through the help of a trained and impartial third party, also called the facilitator. So facilitators are people who are really, really grounded in restorative justice values and principles. So the philosophy that I have really just touched upon. So values like accountability, which is not punishment, which is not conflated with punishment, but accountability as actually showing up to make repair for the impact the harm has caused on everyone involved. So in restorative processes, facilitators, their role really is to create a container where there can be care, there can be a lot of compassion, there can be a feeling of belonging, and they really support everyone involved to feel heard and seen. And also, I think they also nudge each other to become curious about what has actually happened and what is the root cause of why what happened. And often these conversations, this dialogue, lead to explore what everyone needs to heal so that this doesn't happen again. And another thing that's really central to these processes are that they are oriented around the person who has been harmed. So it really takes into account the needs of people harmed, who are able to define their own needs and decide what repair looks like for them. So needs are really central to these processes. And I just also want to say, often we find that there isn't really a binary between victim and perpetrator in how a lot of harm or violence happens in our community. So I may have hurt someone, but I was also hurt by someone else, and how trauma begets trauma. I definitely need to be accountable for the hurt I've caused, but maybe I also deserve for the hurt caused to me to be acknowledged. So a lot can unravel in these processes that deal with such complexities. I also just want to emphasize again that there are no experts in restorative justice. So everyone involved in these processes come together to create outcomes of the process. So as a facilitator, I might ask everyone to help create, offer their own opinions on what's happening and support any plans to repair harm. So the facilitator's role is being there, being present, offering support while the community decides what's best. But of course, being really, really vigilant about needs, about power dynamics, how is power showing up, what are the different structural, systemic elements at play, and gently stepping in to name it. And RJ, I also want to say, is not something that's done to people. It is a way to ask all those impacted to themselves define and decide what moving forward looks like in a dignity affirming way. So, we're thinking about values like uplifting everyone's humanity. We're thinking about truth telling and truth listening. We're thinking about accountability. We're thinking about creating decisions together, understanding needs, and also really, really ensuring that whoever is whoever decides to be a part of this process does it out of like a feeling of voluntariness. So you cannot arm twist anyone to come take accountability, because you can never take accountability out of fear. You can't experience genuine remorse if I force someone and arm twist them and say, no, apologize, and really, really, repair. I think these processes can really support people to reach there. And for these processes to go meaningfully, it only makes sense if everyone participating really, really wants to be a part of that dialogue. So yeah, I think this is where I'll sort of end. But these are just to give you a sense of how these approaches are different. The criminal justice approach and the restorative justice approach, where crime is a violation of the law and the state. In RJ, crime is actually a violation of people and obligations. Violations create guilt here, but violations create obligations. Justice here requires the state to determine blame and impose pain or punishment. Justice involves the person harmed and people, on all the sides of harm in an effort to put things right. Here, the central focus is that the offender gets what they deserve. The focus here is on needs and repairing the harm. And very different questions. The criminal justice system is asking what laws have been broken, who did it, what do they deserve. RJ is more concerned about who has been hurt, what are the needs, and who needs to take accountability for them. Yeah, this is just to think about what happens in these processes. There are outcomes that are decided, and this agreement could look like reparation, restitution, community service, whatever the person harmed may need. And that's where I'll end. I'll pass to you, Swagata, I think. Or back to you, Ayushi.
Swagata, please go.
Thank you so much, Dee, for laying that foundation for this conversation to move forward. I'm conscious of time, so I think I'm going to take a few minutes to just tell you how are we applying this in our work? Because I'm sure everybody's curious about how does this translate for us on the ground. Before I go into that, just to acknowledge that, there are different origin stories as to how we've gotten involved into RJ, and especially considering that Nimisha, Sachi, Urvashi, Arlene, all of us work in the space of child protection. So, we've all, it seems as if this is, happening in this space. There are definitely experiments out there in other spaces, but this is a space that we are familiar with and we can share with you. Each of us has our own entry points into this. For Arlene and me, the entry point was, of course, the Delhi gang rape case of 2012. All of us, may be familiar with it. There was a child in conflict with the law involved in that case, and that led to a complete overhaul of India's juvenile justice laws, where, the possibility of trying a child as an adult was actually something that came from the public anger that ensued after that incident. And that's a notion of justice that we didn't identify with. We just felt that the juvenile justice system is meant to be reformative, is not meant to be retributive. So it was not something that we were aligned with. And at the same time, we understood, the needs of victims as well. And we realized that the justice system, the binary in which it operates, does not fully recognize the range of needs that those who experience harm may have. And also ends up demonizing those who cause harm. So in a way, it reduces people to the worst thing that has happened to them and the worst thing that they may have done. And we wanted to be a part of trying to see what it might look like to approach justice in a different way, in a non-punitive way. And that's where really our engagement, that is Arlene and me, and then we moved to Enfold. Our engagement with restorative justice began, where we decided to get ourselves trained from experts outside of India who could tell us how do you apply this in a framework of juvenile justice, because that was where we worked. Now, having said that, I think what Dee took you through has been our learning journey, because I think when we went into RJ, I can say for Arlene and me, we went into it as seeing it as a process that, okay, let's learn how to do this. Let's bring victims and offenders together. And then, everything is going to be great. They will be healed. They will be also, the persons who caused harm are also going to be healed. And then it's been a complete journey. So it's beautiful to see Dee lay it out for us like this. But this has been our journey. This has been our learning journey. And now it's almost, it's over 10, 11 years. Theoretically, even before that, we've engaged with the concept, but this learning has come over a period of time. And some of the ways in which we apply this into our work is that we recognize that the spaces in which we introduce restorative practices have to be, it has to be owned by the community that is part of that space. We cannot come in as external experts and say, yeah, come, we will sit in circles with you and we will transform this space. It is not going to work. Because when we leave the institution, the people will go back to the ways in which they relate with one another. So it's not something foreign that can, be introduced by someone outside of that space. This group has to see the value in it, identify what the shared values are and what what is it that brings them together. So we've done it in schools where we train teachers how to use circles as a way of building relationships with the student community, among the students, as well as teacher and student. Use it to build social and emotional learning. And then when conflict happens, you have the tools to address conflict. You don't need some external entity to come in and then sit you down in a circle to talk about bullying. It will not work. It might give you momentary satisfaction that you have resolved one instance of bullying in this school. It's not going to lead to a cultural shift. So these are very slow processes and you have to stay with it. Similarly, in childcare institutions, where we sit in circles with children, there our work entails, an effort to build social and emotional learning among children, life skills education, but it also moves into the space of identifying cases in which we can facilitate relationship repair and rebuilding among children and families. There are many children who walk into that space who have a very difficult relationship with their families. They have experienced violence, they have experienced neglect, and it's a cycle of trauma and violence that continues. So somewhere these processes can help us interrupt that cycle of violence, which we don't see. So that's the preventive aspect of this work. There is repair involved, but there's also an effort to prevent further harm from taking place. We've also used this process to facilitate dialogues between those who've been harmed and those who've caused harm. And I think there are two questions that came up when people were introducing themselves. One was, is there an incentive to move towards RJ? And the second one that I noted is that, what is the impact on the victims? How are they looking at this, the RJ process versus retribution? Both great questions. And I think from our experience of actually using these processes to facilitate dialogues, what we've realized is that the justice system, be it the juvenile justice system or the criminal justice system, does not encourage truth telling. The consequences are so high. The consequences are so high to come forward and say, yes, I caused harm. Because it could mean transfer to an adult system, it could mean imprisonment, it could mean in the school setting, it could mean expulsion. So the consequences are very high for someone to come and say, yes, I want to take accountability. From the point of view of the victim, once you approach the justice system, you lose complete control. You do not get what you want. And it's amazing when you actually sit down and have that conversation as to what do you really need. And the need comes down to something as simple as, I want them to acknowledge that they caused me harm. That's what they need. They do not need this person to be removed from the community, do not need this person to be removed from their institution, or to be sent away for 3 years or whatsoever. That's the basic need. And then it's also not an easy journey. Let's not make it seem as if it's very easy, because taking responsibility, like I think Dee asked us that question, how did we feel when we were punished? But let's also think about times when we caused harm. How easy is it for us to accept that we have caused harm to someone and to take responsibility for it? Not an easy process at all. So we've stood by young people, trying to support them in taking responsibility, and that happens when they know that they're not going to be judged, when they know that they are in a safe space, and everybody's invested in moving forward in a good way. So those are some of the ways in which they have been encouraged to take responsibility. Another quick learning has been that, Dee spoke of co-opting. It cannot be ordered. You cannot order people to sit in a process. It does not work. It does not work. It doesn't come from a genuine space at all. And the person who has been harmed can see through it immediately. They know that the person who's in this process with them does not mean a word of what they're saying. So can't be ordered, and that's the difficult part. So then how do you get cases? I will stop here. There's a lot to say, but this is there is also Nimisha and there's Sachi. So I'll pass to Nimisha.
Thanks so much, Swagata. I think Dee, thank you so much, Dee. That was that was such a heartwarming and beautiful presentation. And Swagata, I mean, exactly, the questions that you have raised, I think these are the things that we sit with every day. I'll just speak a little bit about the journey that CSJ had. And it's very interesting that we all of us have intersected at this point of restorative justice, because CSJ started out and continues to be an organization that has, supported child sexual abuse survivors over entire legal cases. And I think what began our journey towards recognizing that this system is not really what justice is about, is working very, very closely with these survivors and seeing the kind of harm that they had already been through, and the justice system really multiplying the harm that they had already gone through. So much so that in some cases we sort of converted this, like these anecdotal experiences into a study as well. And we were told by some survivors that if I had known this is what was going to happen, then I would not have reported what happened to me. I would not have gone to the system. And that is when we sort of CSJ started looking for different solutions and options. And I think it's very interesting how around the same time the nation was having this huge reckoning with how we are addressing sexual violence in the country, and what do we look at as justice in terms of sexual violence, and the changes in the JJ Act came about. But at the same time, we spoke to survivors, communities, families, and figured that exactly acknowledgement, respect, support from their own community, these were the needs. And also, even if punishment was a need, it came out as such a socialized need that, of course, this is what's going to happen because we don't imagine anything else. So these learning sort of led us to the field of restorative justice, addressing the harms that were caused, and also looking at how that harm can be prevented. And we started working on restorative practices. We started going to these institutions, and we have been working with children on both sides of the law, really, again, as Swagata also shared. And I think all of our organizations, we have seen how children who are caught in the trajectory of the juvenile justice system on either side are all suffering through harm, the severe harm that the institutions themselves are causing them. So the system, the justice system that we have, whether it is for adults or for children, it is exacerbating whatever has already happened. It is making it worse. It is solidifying people in their own sort of very, very angry positions. And we have also studied the impact of these institutions that has happened on children, and the kind of the kind of experiences that they have had. And it is heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking if you look at the lived experiences of children. And I include child survivors of sexual abuse in this, where the system is so-called, so to say, for the care and rehabilitation. What systems do when they don't really listen and impose, it's a very, very heavy price for people to pay. So I'll just stop here, and Urvashi, if you can give a little brief about the programs that we have on currently. And yeah, again, I'm also conscious of the time. Yeah.
Thanks, Nimisha, and thanks, Swagata, earlier for talking about your organization. And Dee, what a wonderful presentation. It's so lovely to go back to even understanding it sort of answered so many things for me again of why I have come into this field, just going back to the childhood. And that's where I think where we started off, where Nimisha was talking about CSJ, just starting off doing circles in these institutions. So these institutions where we work with, and essentially we work with the systems. Working with the governments, working with the government departments, to the functionaries. So definitely the role is really challenging. So the idea was when we go to these institutions, because the institutions, though they are meant to provide safe space, they are unable to. So in that case, how do we provide the space where children are able to express their emotions? So we started doing and holding circle processes with children, which Dee touched upon briefly. Also, the idea being that, provide these spaces where children can speak about how it has been for them, how they came into the system, how the impact has been of the institution on them so far, and also the fact that, when children started expressing themselves, sometimes they also found it difficult to express themselves, so we use very creative means, sometimes art, craft, different activities, different tools to ensure that, children are able to express themselves. And through that, we also realized that there were children whose parents didn't want to take them back home. So for us, it was also learning to cater to the needs of these children, understand, and also sort of build restorative models around that. So for us, it was essentially these needs were arising from the field, and then for us to develop these restorative models. So then we started working with the children and their families to see how the processes can work in rehabilitating the children back to their respective homes. So we developed models around that, and then slowly we also understood that, sometimes there is just a lot of value in having these conversations, just restorative conversations with children, just giving them that space where they can speak about the harm they have caused. This is specifically children in conflict with law, children who have been, somewhere they have been accused of committing a crime, so in those cases, then what we started doing was started working with the children and trying to understand what were their needs. So what we also realized that these children, they came into the system because there were several needs which were unmet. Either they were children who were neglected at home, either they had witnessed a lot of violence while growing up. So for us, it was also trying to understand how do we work with the families to make sure that the child does not come back into the system. So having those conversations with children, and also somewhere empowering the children to express their needs. How do they even talk to their parents or the community people, even their own friends, about their needs when they themselves are not able to express them? So throughout, what we also did, we started doing circle processes. We had restorative conversation, one-on-one restorative conversation with children. And sometimes, something which is really important and central is that ensuring that the child's consent is throughout there. So if in a process, the child feels that they are not comfortable, for example, having conversation with the parents or with the community of people, which they had initially thought of, then holding off the process. So respecting the children's decision throughout the process. And in this way, making sure that, we are trying to find different ways and different models to build around to address the needs of children. And what we also started doing during COVID was to offer online circle spaces. For us, it was a huge learning because we were hesitant whether, the circle processes would work. And surprisingly, it did beautifully well. Just the fact that, these children who were in the institutions, they couldn't go anywhere outside. They felt, that there was somebody who would come every week. There was a structure. So these circles, like Dee was mentioning earlier, it adds a structure. So it added a structure wherein they expected, that they would be able to share their concerns. They would be able to talk about what and how things have been for them. And in fact, there came in a time where the children would tell us topics they wanted to speak on. So there were times when children spoke and they said that, they wanted to speak about justice and what it would mean for them and how they would see justice or even address their needs, And oftentimes what we also noticed was that these children, they just wanted a safe space to be heard. So we also realized that there was need to provide more spaces. So we also offered healing circles for children. And slowly what we have started doing is understand based on the needs, we have also started offering different models, so whether it's transition support circles to ensure that, how the children are going back to the families, understanding that, the needs of the children are met at different stages of the entire legal system. So with that, I think I'll stop here and just reiterating, just making sure that, the children's needs and I think understanding that their consent is taken throughout the process is very crucial to the process. And with that, I think I'll pass to Sachi to share a bit about her organization.
Hello, everyone. Gosh, I'm still trying to process everything that everyone said. And thanks, Dee, for just taking us through this beautiful journey of how RJ is and, what all we've been exploring in the last probably a decade or less. So just, I think a couple of things. One is we were asked to share how did we enter this work. And, I've been struggling as to how to put it together because even before I knew the term circles or restorative circles or listening circles, I was in circles. And, I've been that way very lucky because back in 2010, my family hosted something called Awaken Circles, which was like a meditation gathering where we would sit for an hour in silence, followed by reading out a passage. And then everybody would, share in the circle whatever their insights of the passage were. And the house was open to strangers, and like that was in a way a proof of concept, right? Like because for 8 years we held this circle every Wednesday. It was with no agenda, no nothing in return, no money, no nothing, and it was just open to strangers. But 8 years after, we are all very close knit community friends, all of that, right? So I feel like maybe life was preparing me for this, this kind of work. Back in 2012, we started working with children in need of care and protection. And in by around 2014-15, that time both the facilities were in the same premise. And around that time, there was a boy who was transferred from being a child in conflict with the law to a child in need of care and protection. And he ended up saying that he wanted to be a criminal. He wanted to be famous and he wanted his photograph in the newspaper as wanted. And my kind of like, the dialogue we were having is like, why would you want to do this? And how would you do this? And he's like, I'd kill somebody, but Didi, don't worry. I'm not going to kill a good person. I will kill an already famous criminal. Like I'll kill a bad person. So I think that's where, in a way, we entered this space, and serendipity life, everything took me to these places where I started reading about restorative justice, met someone called Sonia Shah, who's also been an amazing trainer, facilitator, who comes to India often to train us, and started doing circle experiments in the Umarkhadi observation home and children's home. So over the last 2-3 years, what we've been trying to do is to create childcare institutions as places of transformation, as places of reflection, as places of healing. And how, like when Dee spoke about restorative justice and restorative practices, it's not a tool, it's not a technique, it is a way of life. And so how do we bring this way of life into childcare institution? When I entered Dongri first, and I'm going to put some visuals together, just share some visuals. So when I entered Dongri first, what we saw was that, the children were often looked at with their labels. We saw that most of them were treated in a certain way. We saw, and this is a quote from RJ, which talks about hurt people, and heal people, heal people. And we saw a lot of that happening in Dongri itself, right? So when we started with very simple experiments of sitting with children in circle, seeing what they need, what they wanted. And I remember the first circle we sat with, the children said that, Didi, there's a lot of lice. There's lice in our pant also. So can you do something about that? So we done this circle where we said, if we had to change Dongri, what is it that you'd want to do? And they came up with a whole list, and I still have this vlog on my thing, but they came up with this whole list of suggestions of what they can do together. And so we got 20 volunteers, 30 children, and every weekend we would just kind of keep changing things and, doing cleanup and scabies camp and many different things. So over the past 3 years, the work has kind of shaped up much more, where, we're saying, okay, what does restorative justice or restorative practices in an institution look like? It means we first begin with the architecture. We create spaces within a facility. And what does that mean? So this is a gate which the children in Ranchi said, we want to change the color of the gate. They drew the painting on paper, then they, put it up on the gate itself. So creating spaces in an observation home which actually restores dignity first. It restores a sense of belonging, a sense of that they matter, and they are not just criminals. Sorry. Okay. Similarly, a lot of experiments were done to connect children to themselves, like Nimisha said, that
I think you need to mute yourself.
Let's see, but it's not a thing. It's a thing that you say like that. It's not a thing. I would say, okay.
You can mute Supriya Ayushi.
Oh yeah, thanks for that, team.
So anyway, so we started working with a lot of experiments which were about, connecting children to themselves and restoring a lot of things that they had missed out on, right? So when you talk about listening and restorative circles, a lot of what we realize is that children don't have a vocabulary. They don't have an emotional vocabulary. They've grown up in violence, where either domestic violence or community violence is what they've experienced, and there is extreme trauma. So even talking, even writing, even saying some things, even understanding the language to say it, like when they speak about anger, they don't have a vocabulary for irritation. They have a vocabulary state which goes to mujhe bahut gussa aaya. So how do we build that vocabulary? How do we build response? How do we teach them how to respond to certain situations in life, and also understand the needs vocabulary, like what do I need because of which I'm behaving like this, or because of which I'm emoting like that. And then also, how do we belong to each other? So this is a really beautiful example of two boys who were being transferred to the prison in Jagdalpur, where after they had an excellent track record in the home, they had done everything. They were actually one of the bhaiyas that children looked up to, the staff looked up to. That day, everybody was crying, but children didn't know how to process this grief. They didn't know how to process the fear. So the children sat in a circle. We shared, okay, what are we scared of? What do we feel? And then they lit a candle, praying for these boys to get released soon. So, how do we create a sense of sacredness, belonging, all of those things, right? Also, how can circles become a part of everyday life? So whether you are doing farming, you're doing gardening, you are doing library, everything embeds the key principles of circle way of life, right? So that is definitely to talk about. We are all related, we all belong to each other, we all have gifts that we can offer to the world, we are equal. That there is a good in everyone, and if we create space, they will show up in that goodness, and that they are worthy, and and to give everybody a choice and agency to participate or not participate. A lot of this has been spoken about in a childcare institution, like in a prison. Silence is in itself a very, very difficult concept, experience. And so how do we create positive experiences of silence? How do we create positive experiences of food? In Dongri, when I had entered, they would give the food just how it has been given in prisons, right? So that to change that and to make it how food can be served with dignity and restoring power and balance each time. So a lot of these kids also, we saw that they had extremely negative inner voices, and how do we show that they have talents and create space for their talents. So I'm just these are just some visuals from the work, and I'm not going into each one of these. But also, how do we build relationships between staff and children? So doing events together, getting the staff to work with the children, a lot of these things. In most of these facilities, outsiders are not allowed, just like in our prisons, right? But here in Bombay, we had this group from Africa who had come, and then there was an entire learning sharing experience in the facility. And that just changes, right? Because now you're no more saying, okay, you are locked up behind walls, but you are actually worthy enough that someone from outside India is coming to meet you, and they are learning and they are impacted much more than you are. So it wasn't a sense of, okay, they are here to see you and you are showroom pieces, but actually create a sense of belonging. And then after, once these kids are released from the institution, we have a post release follow up, and we go meet their families, do circles. We regularly meet in Bombay for circle processes. Also, children do community service. So we have a group of children. So we now have a community of children where we go and do community service once a month. A lot of these kids are now doing really well in their work and life as well. So I'll stop here and just want to talk quickly about two cases that we felt like RJ could have been done, but we were not able to do it. So one was where a brother had raped his sister, sexually assaulted his sister, and the family, both the parents were nurses, and they didn't know what to do really, because they were completely, like, the entire family was in shock. The brother was in the observation home, and slowly working with the brother, we reached a place where the brother wrote forgiveness letters, asking for forgiveness to the parents, to the sister. And 3 years, this has taken 3 years down the line. Now all of them are living back together, and the sister has been able to do this thing, but we were not able to do a RJ process. All of this happened through a counseling process, right? So so this is one. The other incident is of a girl in the CCI who had forged an identity of another girl, and she's a farmer's daughter. She was dark. So through our one-on-one sessions with her, we got to know that, okay, basically the whole issue was with her skin. She had body issues, all of that stuff. And so that process of actually getting to a place where she could understand, she wanted to apologize to the girl, but unfortunately we did not get an order where we could facilitate that process, right? So, but even in a process like that, what does it mean to then, even when you're not able to reach the person she harmed, what is her own forgiveness process is something that we worked on. And just a third incident that I'm thinking about is this boy who would actually killed his own girlfriend, and how like for months together, and none of these kids, right? Like, I mean, all of us, Swagata, Nimisha, all of us will share that all these children who are in childcare institutions do face trauma. They are not able to sleep. They are going through multiple, issues within mental health issues within the facility. And so we did a process where, over a period of like 6-8 months, he'd already been in the institution for 2 years, but over a period of 6-8 months, we did a forgiveness circle where they actually sat in silence and did it was like an embodied process where they had to walk around, and then they had to just say that they forgive each other, and they forgive themselves, and it's complicated because the case is still going on. The lawyers are saying don't say anything, so it is just a very internal process. But in this process also, like how the boy came back and said, I'm not done yet, I still have to forgive myself, and I still have to forgive some more people, so can we do this process again? So what are these sacred processes which are slow, which are very one by one, very intuitive, and that can help people get to a certain place of responsibility, accountability, healing, all of that. Yeah, I'll stop here. I'm sorry, I think I went way over time.
Nimisha, you have a question?
Yeah, no, I thanks so much, Sachi. Always so beautiful to listen to all the stories. So I just had a thought from something that you were saying actually, and sort of to respond to Supriya's question, about, you asked about check bouncing and like this is like very literal, very, very practical sort of application of restorative practices, perhaps like check bouncing and motor vehicle cases and all. And something sort of somewhat related to this, we are right now grappling with this concept called diversion right now in child protection circles. Now then there is, I mean, if we ever get like 2 hours or something separately, then maybe we will talk more in detail about it. But like basically diversion is the concept of diverting a child from the justice system to make sure that it does not have all of these harmful impacts on them. And like there are technicalities to the term, there are discussions and disagreements really at what stage is diversion really diversion. If the child has already spent say 6 months inside an institution, if you get them out, is that still diversion? So there are all of these things, but like there are different ways of diversion, and restorative justice is one method of diversion, a restorative justice program. So not putting a child in the justice system, but having giving them the option of perhaps taking up a restorative justice process instead of through the normal sort of justice judicial process. So those programs are there in many countries, not in India really currently. But one of the questions that we are sort of grappling with is we see a lot of petty offenses. Petty offenses are like the smaller offenses which are punishable with an amount less than 3 years. We see a lot of children who are still incarcerated, in institutions, Supriya, for these sort of petty offenses, small little things. And, in these sort of cases, we have spoken to the children, and like again these are like small things like mobile has been stolen or something, like a small like a scooter has been stolen or something of that sort and then returned or abandoned somewhere, that sort of thing. And we actually need to, I think, when we are looking at the justice ecosystem, the question that we need to grapple with is, do you even need a justice process? Like this is a very small, like this is such a like a like a small level thing, that putting especially a child or even an adult through an entire restorative justice process, because that is a yeah, sure, absolutely. So my point being that a restorative justice process can also be an intensive, time consuming process. So having a restorative justice process for something like a check bouncing, we actually explore that, do we need to get these processes into the justice system at all, or not have them as crimes that come into the justice procedure at all? So yeah, that's what the point that I wanted to make.
Nimisha, I think Satyam, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I just wanted to ask Sachi, what does she suggest as to what all steps or what all mechanism can the judicial system provide to address the concerns? As in, what sort of orders or what sort of reliefs can further be given to address the concerns which are otherwise faced by JCLs or CCLs?
So I think so similar to what Nimisha also mentioned, right? Like that there are so many people languishing in the justice system because justice is delayed. The cases don't start for 2, 3, 4 years. and the kids are just languishing in these facilities. I think if we can look at what is possible if they are given bail, what is possible if they were not even brought into the system, what is possible in terms of their behavior change. So I think the whole idea of restorative justice is where we are talking about that if these are people who have been swayed away from the mainstream society, they are ill, they need to be treated, right? If we are looking at that as if they are hurt, then they need to be treated, they need to be healed. So then from that point of view, if we can create orders which are, so just to give you an example, for that girl, we had suggested the juvenile justice board that if they could give us an order where this girl could go to 5 schools and we will go with her to actually present what does it present the problems with cybercrime, and what happens and what are the consequences of it, and create a presentation on forging identity and not revealing her own identity. This could have been done, which would have actually supported in bringing out her confidence. People would have liked it, and this could have been a restorative solution in that sense. So I do feel like, unfortunately, our childcare institutions, our prisons are not places which are rehabilitative. And that's also the reason why we really need to think, do they need to be inside? So, and are we like, I mean, the boy that I was talking about, he came in theft and he was thinking of murder. So what are we really doing? So in terms of support, I think orders which are more rehabilitative would make more sense.
See, there's a practical difficulty with that. I'm sorry, I'm perhaps taking a lot of time on this. The practical difficulty is, yes, perhaps that boy has been brought in for theft. He is perhaps now in company of individuals who have a slightly adverse bent of mind. But practically, for a judicial officer or even for a, say, jail superintendent or the person in charge for JCL or for home observation home, how do they create a distinction, and on what basis do they create a disparity amongst individuals who have been sent there? Because it's very easy to say that they should be segregated and they should be treated differently and they should be, perhaps some mechanism should be involved. But keeping the constraints of the administrative exigencies and the finance and other aspects in mind, what are the specific inputs? What is something which can actually be done on ground? Do you suggest which, judicial officers or perhaps jail superintendents, or for that matter, superintendent of observation homes can actually do within their limited resources and the means which they have? Because there's a political scenario with considering the lot of money which is being spent in keeping them, pursuing their education, housing them, and doing other things. So they have a limited set of needs. And second aspect is what you are identifying is essentially not within the judicial system. Yes, everything flows from the courts, but the frank reality is that the entire concept of independence of courts keeps them on a separate pedestal altogether. Like, practical reality is that jail and observation homes come within the state Delhi government. I can give Delhi example. They come within the purview of Delhi government. I've done some work in this regard. I was assisting in amicus in a matter in Delhi High Court. So I know, because we visited a couple of observation homes. So I figured that what is actually transpiring. I have some insight as to what is happening there. The difficulty which comes up is that observation homes, jails, everything is coming within the authority of the state government. Today, if you approach a magistrate that you please give an order for a jail superintendent, the magistrate will say, no, I don't have the jurisdiction or the authority to give such an order. I have no authority to dictate how a superintendent manages his affairs within the observation unit. So judges are helpless in this regard in practical reality. Unless it's some exigence, it's an absolute exigency, even in those orders, they don't write that I am directing the jail superintendent to do this. They write the jail superintendent is requested to look into this. So these are two different things altogether. So one bit, I understand that yes, there is a delay in the system. Now that is attributable to a lot of reasons, but perhaps an insight which you can offer is, how do they perceive the judicial process? What is the negativity they feel about the judicial process? Perhaps that is something which can be worked out to address, or a more lenient procedure can be adopted by the POCSO courts and other similar courts, or the children court.
Yeah, so I think a couple of things, and I think I'll invite Nimisha and Swagata to speak to this also. But there is one which is how the institutions are run, and the childcare institutions, observation homes, how they are run, and how badly they are run. So that's one part of it. Even if we didn't touch that, within the judicial system, like we are seeing where children who come into petty offenses, like and this is also in the jail system where there's a lot of injustice on who gets released and who doesn't get released. So finally, these observation homes become kind of hoarding places for mostly poor, poor, economically poor children. And there's a lot of discrimination that we see in the judgments itself. Secondly, when we're talking about children's court, the cases are just not like, the delay is unbelievable. And also in the provision of the JJ Act, there is something called the progress report. There is something where you can ask the probation officer to submit a progress report. There's something called supervision. There's something called community service orders. All of these are provisions that the judges can actually, implement while giving out the orders. I'll pass it on because I'm not from the legal background. I think Swagata and Nimisha are much more savvy with that. So I'll pass it on to them.
Yeah, thank you, Sachi, and thank you, Satyam, for your questions. I think what is unique about the juvenile justice system is that, there is a very comprehensive set of provisions in terms of what rehabilitation looks like for children in conflict with the law, very distinct from the adult system. So here there are clear standards laid down even for childcare institutions. There's a lot of innovation that is possible by the juvenile justice boards themselves, because of the range of orders. One can look at community service, counseling, advice, admonition. So there's a range of things that goes beyond just institutional responses to crime, something that the framework already permits. But having said that, I think this conversation is more, one is asking everyone to reflect on what justice looks like and how justice can look in different ways. Institutionalization sometimes is the response when we look at a crime that is heinous, quote unquote. Although the JJ Act also says that bail is the rule, irrespective of whether the offense is bailable or not. So even if it's a case of murder or it's a case of rape, a child is still entitled to bail unless releasing the child puts the child at risk. So we see that the principles that operate in the space of children in conflict with the law are very different from how it is in the adult-oriented criminal justice system. Another thing that I just want to put across is that the idea is not to supplant or substitute the existing system. The idea is not to say the system is bad and therefore we need this. It's somewhere trying to say that maybe the needs of both the persons who are causing harm and those who have been harmed can be met through other ways of approaching justice. And should that option exist or not? And I think there are some very specific questions on, do judges order it? At what stage do they order it? So in India right now, we don't have a statutory framework that is governing this. Unlike other countries, New Zealand has it. Like for New Zealand, it's the default system. You first go through the RJ system. If that does not work, then you come into the formal juvenile justice system. India doesn't have a law that is governing this space. So, and neither should we be in a rush to, institutionalize it in the form of a law. We have to test it. We have to see what are the challenges at our ground level, what kind of, power imbalances also take place in processes like this. So there's a lot of, these are very early nascent stages. But as I had shared, and I think the other organizations also have similar experiences, we're looking at how this can be used before the matter is even reported to the police. There are many cases that do not get reported to the police. And then, victims are left with the option of either not doing anything about it or going through a system which is going to be very harsh for them. So this is an option where the offense is of a nature that does not attract mandatory reporting, and yet they want some solution. Can it not be available to them? And we would know this. I mean, we would know this. There are, lots of conflict taking place in and around us. Everybody is not rushing to the police. Yet they want some resolution. So they go to a mediation process. They go to a family elder, go to somebody they already know. So this is that process that exists, which ensures the rights and the dignity of everybody is ensured. Power imbalances are put in check, and the parties themselves arrive at what the resolution might look like. The other option is when the matter is pending, and that is very complicated because there is a legal process that is ongoing. how do you incorporate this process while also ensuring that this is voluntary? Because that's one of the cornerstones of the restorative justice process. You have to consent to participate. Even the person who's caused harm has to consent to participate. It cannot be a direction that now you go and participate in an RJ process. So how does the facilitator ensure that even if the JJB is sending this child to you, this is truly a process where the child has walked in voluntarily? So there are concerns related to that. Then there's of course the option of working with children when they are in these institutional spaces, because also in the restorative justice frame we are looking at harm very broadly. You're not only looking at the victim. The incident may have happened, and we have dealt with cases like this. Sachi spoke about a case of brother and sister. We are dealing with a case where this child is accused of murdering her father, and her father had subjected her to sexual abuse. It's complex. Now who's the victim and who's the who's the person who's been harmed? Like we was just talking about the binary of victim and offender here, and the mother has been harmed, right, because she's lost her husband. So we recognize that it's not just these are not these watertight categories, and there is a process needed between the mother and the daughter, because the daughter feels mother doesn't believe me that my father sexually abused me. Mother doesn't know what's going on. Why did she, she had a boyfriend and therefore she killed the father? So there are lots of things to unravel here. The justice system does not address this harm, right? There's a relationship that is completely broken down here. So through the RJ process gives us an option to at least work on the mother and daughter, whether they want to move forward in a good way, then this process becomes available to them. So I'll just stop here, and if there are more questions on Nimisha, you want to come in?
We're already a little over time, a lot over time. So, but Satyam's question made me think that are there any resources available for lawyers that they can refer to? So since lawyers are not taught about restorative justice and the legal system doesn't formalize this mechanism at all, if there's any way that lawyers can, any resources that they can refer to that they can use while they are in a legal process that can enable the legal process to recognize something like this. For instance, it could be referring parties to restorative justice for compoundable offenses, or it could be referring parties to restorative justice when settlement is allowed, for cases where settlement is allowed. So just thinking about that question and holding it, if there are, how can that gap be bridged between the actual practice that and like the formal practice of it and the practice outside the formal system?
So I think there are quite a few programs that are, I can just quickly say that MNLU, that's Maharashtra National Law University, runs a 2-year course, MA on mediation. And there is a dedicated module on restorative justice that's taught by, they have international and national faculty, and both Arlene, D and I, three of us, we also take a module on restorative justice where we do talk about the process that can be used. And I think all the organizations here, there are trainings that are offered on restorative circles. If Arlene is here, Arlene can also, Arlene has taken a course on mediation. So Arlene, if you can also share how there is, that there are distinctions here between mediation and restorative justice, but there's certainly certain tools of the restorative processes that can be incorporated, as part of mediation. But as as you would have realized from Dee's presentation, RJ is a much broader framework.
Yeah.
Like RP is much broader. So can't just be reduced to certain tools as such. But I mean, these avenues do exist.
Thanks, Swagata. Anything that anyone would like to say as closing? Any of the participants? Any last question? Okay, thank you so much. Sorry, we are over time. I'll share the recording of this session shortly, and thank you everyone for joining, and for everyone from Enfold, Ashiyana, and CSJ for sharing with us about your work. And hope to see you in the next learning circle. Have a good evening and a good weekend.
Thank you, Ayushi.
Thank
for
you so
hosting this.
much. Thank you, Ayushi.